Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to dive deep. Today we'll be tackling likelihood functions.
Ooh, sounds a bit complicated.
It might sound like it, but trust me, it's super fascinating. We'll be using an article by Manu Gupta called Understanding Likelihood Function in a Simplified Way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Simplified is always good, right?
Exactly. And by the end of this, you'll be the likelihood function guru amongst your friends. So imagine a doctor, right? They need to figure out the best treatment for a patient.
They wouldn't just go in blind, would they?
Of course not. They'd look at the data, the symptoms, and try to figure out which treatment is most likely to work.
So are you saying likelihood functions are like the doctor's secret weapon?
Kind of. They help us decode the mysteries hidden in the data.
Okay, that sounds less intimidating.
Right. You don't need a PhD to grasp this. The article kicks off with a simple coin toss example. Imagine flipping a coin 10 times and getting 7 heads.
Makes you wonder if the coin is rigged, right?
Exactly. Our intuition screams, something's fishy, and that's where the likelihood function comes in.
So it's about, like, proving if the coin is biased.
Not exactly proving, but more like letting the data guide us. The likelihood function helps us figure out what's most likely true, not about proving it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Like a detective gathering clues.
Perfect analogy. In this case, the data, those 7 heads, suggests that the coin might be biased toward heads. But a biased coin doesn't guarantee more heads every single time, right? How does likelihood handle that randomness?
You've hit on a key point. Coin flips are random, even if there's a bias. The likelihood function takes that into account.
So we're not just eyeballing it, there's a formula involved.
You got it. It helps us measure how well different probabilities for getting heads fit the results. It's like comparing suspects in a lineup, giving each a score based on how well they match the evidence.
Okay, so each possible probability gets a score based on how well it explains the 7 heads we got.
Exactly. The article provides the formula, but don't worry, we won't go full-on math class on you.
Phew.
But it basically involves P, which is the probability of getting heads on a single toss. We want to find the P that best explains the data, those 7 heads.
Okay, so we test out different values of P, like let's say 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on, and see which one fits best with those 7 heads.
You're getting it. And that best fit, my friend, is what we call the maximum likelihood estimator, or MLE for short.
MLE, got it. So we're basically using this MLE to pinpoint the most likely probability of getting heads, given those 7 heads we observed.
Precisely. It's like having a statistical compass guiding us to the most plausible explanation.
This is pretty powerful stuff. And it's not just limited to coin tosses, right? This could be used for, I don't know, analyzing election results.
Absolutely. Imagine using it to understand the actual support for a candidate based on all the pre-election polls.
Oh, wow. That's actually really useful.
Right. Or in finance, modeling stock prices or predicting trends.
This is blowing my mind. But the article also mentioned something about Bayesian statistics. Can you explain how that fits in?
Sure. Bayesian statistics uses the likelihood function, but it also considers prior beliefs. Imagine you walk into this coin toss situation already thinking the coin is fair.
Okay, I get that. Most people would assume a coin is fair.
Right, so you have a prior belief. Then you see the data, those 7 heads. Now you need to update your belief. Bayesian statistics combines the prior belief with the new data to create a posterior belief. The likelihood function helps us figure out how much to adjust our belief based on the data.
Whoa, this is making me think about data in a whole new way. It's not just about the numbers, but about how they interact with our beliefs and how we can refine our understanding of things. Now, I also noticed the article mentioned using Python to plot the likelihood function. Why would we want to do that?
Well, plotting the likelihood function helps us visualize it. It's like turning all those calculations into a picture. You can actually see the shape of the function.
Oh, I see. So in the coin toss example, we see a peak on the graph at p equals 0.7. That visually confirms that's the most likely probability based on those 7 heads.
Exactly. And for anyone who's into optimization, finding that peak, that MLE, it often involves calculus.
Yeah, I vaguely remember calculus.
But the cool thing is, even without the math, just understanding that we're looking for that peak is a big step.
Makes sense. So we're kind of using a statistical magnifying glass to pinpoint the most likely explanation. And this isn't limited to coin tosses, right?
Not at all. Likelihood functions can be used in so many different scenarios.
Give me an example.
Like, think about analyzing election results.
Yeah.
We could use likelihood functions to try to figure out the real level of support for a candidate based on all the polls.
That's fascinating, especially with all the polls and predictions leading up to an election.
Yeah. Or in finance, you could use likelihood functions to model stock prices. Try to predict future trends, make smarter investment decisions.
Wow, so versatile. But are there any common misconceptions about likelihood functions? Because it almost sounds too good to be true.
There are a few. One big one is thinking the likelihood function gives you the exact probability of a parameter value. It's important to remember that it's about relative likelihood.
So it's not saying the probability of getting heads is definitely zero point 0.7. It's more like saying, based on what we see, zero point 0.7 is the most likely.
Exactly. It's like a ranking of the probabilities based on the evidence.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another misconception is confusing the likelihood function with the probability distribution of the parameter. They are connected, but they're not the same thing. The likelihood function is about the parameter, given the data, while a probability distribution describes the uncertainty about the parameter itself.
Starting to wrap my head around that. It's all about the relationship between the data, the model we're using to represent it, and the parameter we're trying to estimate. But are there any limitations to using likelihood functions? It can't be perfect, right?
Of course, like any tool, it has its limitations. One thing is, it depends on our model accurately representing the process that created the data in the first place. A bad model will give us bad results.
Right, that's like trying to use a cake recipe to make, I don't know, a pizza. It just won't work. So choosing the right model is super important.
Absolutely. And another limitation is that likelihood functions don't automatically consider uncertainty in our data. There could be errors, biases in how the data was collected, and we need to consider how that might affect our results.
So it's not just about plugging numbers into a formula. It's about being smart about the data itself, understanding where it came from. I'm really appreciating how the likelihood function helps us connect the raw data to the bigger picture.
It's a bridge, right, from just observing data to making actual inferences about the world around us.
Exactly. And I loved that analogy in the article about the likelihood function being like a rebellious teenager.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't care about what we think should be true. It's
Yeah.
all about what the data is saying.
It's like the data's whispering secrets, and the likelihood function is that friend who's really good at listening and deciphering those whispers. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you'd leave with our listener? Something to think about as they encounter data in their everyday life.
I think the biggest takeaway is it's not about being absolutely certain. It's about finding the most likely explanation, based on what we see in the data.
That's a good point. We live in a world full of uncertainty, but data can help us navigate it.
Exactly. And likelihood functions, they're a tool to help us do that better, make better decisions, whether it's about healthcare or understanding elections, or even just, figuring out if that coin you're flipping is actually fair.
It's all about embracing that unknown and letting the data be our guide. Likelihood functions can illuminate the path forward. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you've learned something new and maybe even feel a little more empowered to think critically about data. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the world of data.